man was walking in the woods one day when he saw a bear out of the corner of his eye. He stopped, said a silent prayer. God, I know you can do all things. Will you please make this bear a fellow Christian? The bear caught up to the man, placed his paw on the man's shoulder, and said, Brother, will you pray with me? Dear God, for this meal that I am about to receive, make me truly thankful. This is The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilsman. Welcome to episode 33 of The Christian Bear. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Hilskamp. Before I introduce today's speaker, I have to apologize that the audio in some parts of this recording has become corrupted. Unfortunately, I was also using a new microphone myself that hadn't been previously tested. Therefore, there will be some parts of the recording where there will be significant background noise. Again, I apologize, and I hope it won't distract too much for the overall quality of the episode. That being said, I'm happy to welcome to the podcast my friend, college classmate, and one-time roommate, Nelson Berry. Nelson was born in Austin, Texas, but grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. From an early age, he was immersed in the Episcopal Church and spent many years in church choirs. He earned his bachelor's degree in classical languages from Sewanee, the University of the South, and his master's degree in Latin from the University of Georgia. For the past 12 years, he has taught Latin at the high school level in Nashville. During that time, Nelson has also taught middle school theater classes and has directed a number of high school and middle school theatrical productions.
We're good.
So thank you again, Nelson, for being on today's episode of The Christian Bear. To get us started, what do you believe?
Well, I've got three sort of general topics, but one that I think I would want to focus the most on, and what I will lead off with is, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Not going to go ahead and do the whole Nicene or Apostles' Creeds for you, but short answer is I am a Christian, but my journey as a Christian has been pretty different over the past decade in particular, but also even the past 20 years. Now, I would say that my growth as a Christian has been very personal and unique, and I think part of my growth can be valuable to share. In particular, to go back to the question, though, I believe that what is important about being a Christian is treating all people with love, as we hear and read in the Gospels. And similarly, I do not believe that hate or otherwise judging people based on their not being Christian or otherwise not following Christian ideals is right. I don't think that is something that is proper. At the same time, I try not to, as much as I can, judge people for what they believe, even if, for example, they are Christians and we believe different things about our own faith. That is one of my sort of core beliefs that I want to discuss today. But also, as a language and theater teacher, I believe that those two pursuits have incredible educational value. By studying language, we as students and as people are forced to learn about other cultures and other beliefs different from ours. And we engage with ideas that are not from our original backgrounds, or otherwise, we are challenged on a more regular basis by studying different languages and cultures from beyond our immediate environments and upbringings. And related to that, theater I mentioned is valuable not only for the performative skills, public speaking, um, but also the empathetic skills in particular. You, in my experience, can't be as effective an actor, as effective a performer in that regard, if you aren't able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And generally, in my experience, I find that a lot of hate, fear, misunderstanding, hate and fear is based on misunderstanding or otherwise just not knowing where other people are coming from. And whether you agree with that or not, that is, where the people are coming from, it's still important to at least try to see where they're coming from in that regard. So a little bit all over the place, but those are sort of the three main topics that I've got on my mind for today.
Thank you for sharing that. How have you come to hold those beliefs?
Um, so starting with Christianity, this is going to be, I think, the more uh, in-depth discussion here. I was baptized into the Episcopal Church as a baby. I attended church regularly, pretty much every Sunday as a child. I didn't always want to go, but what actually was a major influence on sort of encouraging me to participate and be part of the Episcopal Church specifically, but also to be a Christian, was when I first was old enough to join the church choir. And this is where kind of theater and performance ties in for my life, at least. From a very young age, I've always been interested in performing, specifically singing, but also acting. Musicals were a strong um, interest of mine, again, from a very young age. And when I learned that, oh, right, you can perform in church uh, as part of the service, that was what really sort of drove me to pay attention to, what I was hearing and what I was growing up with in terms of beliefs, and then what beliefs uh, stuck with me moving forward. So a lot of my formative Christian beliefs were based on, the traditional hymns of the Episcopal Church, which of course are slightly different from the Catholic Church, but still strongly influenced, very traditional. Uh, not the New Age stuff. I'm a little old fashioned to enjoy that, but um, yeah, I found the church choirs that I was part of for many years. Throughout, even after college, I was in a church choir up until probably about 7 years ago. Now it was probably the last time that I was in a choir. Just work kind of took over. But one of the reasons why I gravitated toward the church, in addition to those sort of performance aspects, were when I was 7, I lost my father to pancreatic cancer. And over the course of the next year, I also lost my stepbrother and my uncle to um, other problems. And one of the ways that I processed that grief was by sort of throwing myself into the performance in church choirs, um, and also just whenever I had the chance in school or otherwise in other opportunities, just performing, because when you perform, you're doing it for somebody else, and you're also engaging with your own emotional content, and you're also engaging with your own personal involvement. But you have to also distance yourself from that uh, personal connection in some ways, because you are performing, you are doing a service for others. So it was a way for me both to process my grief, but also uh, kind of not process it as well. I ended up in a number of counseling sessions with Christian counselors, and I went to a number of camps over the course of my life, and fortunately, got therapy to process that grief more completely. But because of those traumatic events, I threw myself into essentially kind of believing uh, the very traditional Christian beliefs that I was brought up with. For example, no sex before marriage, and I am going to say this now. Again, these are beliefs that I have since wrestled with, but it is important for me to acknowledge that I was very much not in favor of homosexuality or other LGBTQ plus people. I mean, just in general, that was the way I was raised. Is that was, um, you know, for lack of a better word, evil, um, and that really colored a lot of my interactions with people for years until I successfully wrestled with those beliefs and changed my beliefs, and I have since been able to come to my more core belief that I mentioned earlier, that we all are supposed to love each other, um, as we have been taught by Jesus and by the teachings of just the general Christian theology. Another influence that led me to have these beliefs, again, both my original beliefs and my changed beliefs, was that because I lost my father at such a young age, I didn't get to know him as completely as many others do. And uh, I grew up hearing stories of what a wonderful man he was, how he inspired uh, both his friends, but also just his acquaintances, those around him, to love and give back to their community, and otherwise just what sort of standards he held himself to. And naturally, I wanted to emulate those same standards. So I felt a strong pressure to sort of live up to these standards, these traditional beliefs that I was being raised with. And that was, again, something that I had to uh, eventually come to grips with, that I was trying to live up to somebody else's standards, not necessarily do myself service, um, and otherwise to be my own person. But over time, and again, going back, looping in the performance aspects in my high school in particular, I found a lot of comfort in performing, and that again began to influence how I interpreted and otherwise how I saw people around me, and my beliefs concerning them. And I also started studying Latin in high school, and especially because it has Latin specifically, but also ancient Greek, has a strong connection to the foundation of the New Testament, but also just in the general history of the Christian Church. I really threw myself into studying both of those languages, both Latin and Greek, and knew that I wanted to engage with those languages eventually, if not immediately as well. And so ended up becoming a teacher. But both of those languages helped influence, again, both my initial focus on Christian beliefs, that is the fundamental Christian beliefs, trying to dig into what does the text really say. And then I realized, especially in some sort of well-known passages from the New Testament, but also some lesser known passages, or at least for my ears, lesser known, the translations that we are given, the translations that we are, as lay people, more familiar with, are not necessarily the most accurate translations. But nonetheless, those three aspects sort of came together over time.
Funny how that works, right?
I know, right? Yeah, I don't think I have to tell you how studying philosophy and logic sort of influences one's own beliefs.
Definitely, definitely. Um, as does the studying the language and the translation
Mm-hmm.
of our sacred texts.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two parts of what you just said that struck me. I'm going to wait for one for a moment, but I want to come. Drafts, I just lost my train of thought. Um, so instead, I'm going to focus on kind of the second part, which goes in my third question as well. And one thing I'll say for anyone who's listening, um, one thing you might not know about Nelson and I is we were roommates our sophomore year of college, and we definitely connected. Probably in one of the bigger ways over the fact that we were both members of the university choir. So we had that very church background. We had very musical background. I was less of a theater person, but still had an appreciation for theater. Um, so, but one of the things that I remember very clearly is that was also the year that I came out, and I remember talking to folks and saying, "Should I come out to Nelson?" And everyone at Swanee, wherever your beliefs were at the time, everyone at Swanee was like, "Yes, of course you should. Nelson wouldn't mind." But there was something about living with someone that, for me, I couldn't come out to you until like the day after we had moved out of our sophomore dorm.
Mm-hmm.
I think I even came out to the roommate I was going to have for my junior year before I came out to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I would only say, because I feel like that may have been one of the times, beginning, middle, end, I'm not sure, of where you were wrestling with faith, that
Mm-hmm.
everyone else was like, "Yeah, tell Nelson, he won't give a damn." So I guess in thinking about that, how did you wrestle with some of those beliefs that have changed, whether that's homosexuality or other beliefs? How did what was that process like for you?
So again, yes, thank you for sorry. Yes, thank you for reminding me of that scenario. I was not the easiest person to get along with in some particular ways. I know I held very strong opinions, and I was vocal about my opinions in another number of ways. But I also know,
For the record, let's be clear that so was I,
well, yes, and
and I could not have been the easiest roommate, particularly at that point in my life. But keep
well,
going.
well, thank you, but and I think that's partially again what brought us together as well. I remember we were at the end of our freshman year when we were both kind of trying to figure out who we were going to room with. We just ended up having like the longest opinionated conversations, I want to say, about Stargate, if and some other topics as well, but
That sounds
just
right.
thinking like, oh, right, yeah, this is someone who's not afraid of his opinions, and I very much appreciated that. You're absolutely right. That was a complicated time for me and my beliefs. It was at the tail end of my sort of more formal transition of those beliefs. So I'll kind of uh, give you how I'll sort of go in chronological order then. So I had a high school teacher who was my theater teacher, and I remember sort of he was the first example of someone whom I knew to be a Christian, but he had married uh, a woman who was Jewish, and they had decided to raise their children in Jewish beliefs. And I remember thinking, well, that's not allowed. That doesn't make sense, right? I mean, from again, this very traditional, fundamental Christian perspective, you know, even though the Episcopal Church itself, at least the ones that I attended, was not much into proselytizing, conversion, um, as much as some other denominations are. I just remember thinking, well, I'm supposed to marry a good Christian girl, and I'm supposed to make good Christian children, and here's this man who is a Christian. Like we talked about our faith and beliefs, not frequently, but we did. Um, and it was this first moment of cognitive dissonance that, oh, so there are people who, believe things differently from me. And, we both share the same core values, but according to what I've been told, that's not the right thing. But all of my interactions with my teacher, have been right. So it was this first moment of cognitive dissonance of like, this doesn't quite add up, but I don't feel comfortable changing my beliefs because I didn't think that you could, basically. And that started my freshman year in high school, and I continued to do theater throughout um, the rest of high school and throughout most of college. So what was the next sort of major transition point, or at least the next step in that transition, was literally the first day of college. I met um, who would be my best friend throughout my 4 years there, Whitney. We shared two classes. One was theater, the other humanities, which, man, that could be a podcast on its own, just that humanities class. But Whitney uh, and I instantly bonded, mostly because of theater, but also because we realized that we shared a lot of interests in common. And the cognitive dissonance was that she was self-described lesbian, but she had been raised in the Baptist church in rural Tennessee. And I remember thinking, what? That doesn't make sense. How can you be, again, LGBTQ plus and be raised in the Christian church? That doesn't make any sense. And at the time, she did not describe herself to me as Christian. She knew, all the same prayers and even more hymns than I knew. She knew way more Bible verses than I ever knew. But she did not hold the same values. But at the same time, it was this idea that, or I was confronted with the idea that, well, we can be friends, right? And she was the first person I had met who was openly gay, or otherwise had, told me initially that she was, and we were still instant friends regardless. So again, you can kind of see that. I mean, I was basically a white upper class bigot essentially in um, no uncertain terms, and our friendship was a first and important step in making me confront specifically my beliefs about and support of LGBTQ plus initiatives and people. Um, and she, even though we disagreed a lot, like we actually had a lot of discussions early on in our friendship about what we think is important in Christianity and just our particular beliefs. But as much as we disagreed, we were still friends, and our disagreements were never uh, ill will or anything. There was no there wasn't anything being challenged personally, and so neither of us felt threatened by the other, and we stayed good friends for years. Another crucial turning point was the same year. I want to say it was around this time, our freshman year, when Bishop Gene Robinson visited the campus. Bishop Gene Robinson, as I recall, was the first openly gay Episcopal bishop, if not the first openly gay Christian bishop, period. But he visited in the fall of 2006, if I'm remembering correctly. It might have been the spring of 2007. But he was attending the school for a conference, some sort of speech. Um, and he actually had attended Sewanee years ago and had also been a brother of the local chapter of Lambda Chi Alpha, which is a national fraternity that is based in Christian ideals. So Bishop Robinson was visiting the school, and the local chapter of Lambda Chi, where he had been a brother, had a special meet and greet for him the night before, whatever this speech or conference was. And at the time, I should also mention that I was convinced that fraternities were little more than drinking clubs and therefore evil. We want to lean into my being judgmental at the time. I definitely was. But I was still friends with a number of people who were either part of the fraternity or were interested in the fraternity. And they invited me. They said, hey, I think you'd like to meet this guy since, you're really into the Episcopal Church. I think this would be a good opportunity for you. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, that's actually a really good point. Here's this nationally recognized figure, and it would be a, a lost opportunity should I not go. So I decided, yeah, let's check it out, and I'll, in my vain post high school mind, I'll give him a shot, basically. Um, and so I remember standing, and the chapter house of the fraternity is essentially a small house, at least by the standards that I was familiar with at the time. I'd say it was, something like 2,000 square feet, 2 floors, something like that. And it was packed. There were active brothers, there were alumni, faculty, um, probably visitors who weren't even related to the school, but were otherwise, attending the same conference or were just interested and heard that Bishop Robinson would be there. And I don't remember what Bishop Robinson said, but I remember seeing him surrounded by uh, both his active brothers, that is the current students, but also the alumni brothers, these faculty, these people who clearly cared about him and what he had to say. And I also remember how just gentle, how soft spoken he was. His message, again, I don't remember specifically, but I remember it being more in line with the type of love that we are called to preach and teach and share as Christians. And again, there was this moment, like with Whitney, of sort of cognitive dissonance where I had been taught and raised, and up until that point, pretty much believed that if you were gay, you were going to hell, or, it was otherwise an improper lifestyle. And here's this man who is clearly a loving Christian doing, as far as I could tell, God's work and openly gay. And it was, again, another strong challenge to these deeply held and wrong, I now believe, beliefs that I had. The last major turning point that really cemented this shift in belief for me happened after my sophomore year. I spent a semester of 2009 studying abroad in Rome and being immersed in the language, both literally Italian, of course, but also I was studying Latin, so there was a lot of that too. But being immersed in the culture of a city that was literally thousands of years old, seeing churches that are hundreds of years old with everyday people walking the halls, seeing the contrasted monuments to fascism with the more modern celebrations of Italian culture, seeing essentially this contradiction of a city was an amazing experience, and living there for a semester. And when I came back to Swanee that fall, I had a lot of cognitive dissonance stored up in my head and in my heart with all of these challenged beliefs. And I was beginning to feel a strong sense of hypocrisy, that I wasn't really being a true Christian, that the way that my friends were living and the way that I wanted to live was not right. But at the same time, there wasn't any evidence that it was wrong. And at the let me fast forward. I mentioned earlier that I had thought all fraternities to be essentially evil social drinking clubs. Well, my friends in the chapter of Lambda Chi Alpha, same one that Bishop Robinson had joined all those years ago, really convinced me that there was something more than what appeared to be the case for many fraternities, drinking and parties and all sorts of rambunctious behavior. And the Lambda Chi's, to be fair, had all of those things, but there was also something clearly more there, and it intrigued me. I had no idea what it could be, because it literally is part of the secret ritual of the fraternity. But what I'll say is that, over time, they convinced me that whatever bond they had is one that I wanted to share in. And having grown up as an only child, having no brothers or sisters whom I was living with growing up, I hungered for that kind of connection. And, I was kind of going through the motions. I was learning about the history of the fraternity, and I was getting closer to the active brothers. But honestly, the one of the most pivotal moments of my life was going through the ritual initiation of the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity. Uh, Again, not going to go into details, but there is, for each brother, or at least each brother to be, there is a personal, significant experience that we all have. And each of our experiences is different. Um, I can say that, and I have said already, that the fraternity itself is based on Christian values and Christian teachings. And so, too, does the ritual teach us and promote those teachings and values. And all of this initiation process happens over the course of one night. And I remember the next morning staring out basically at the sunrise with my new brothers as well as the older brothers, and just having gone through that, in some ways, literal transformational experience. I realized, wait a minute, this profound experience I just had was shared by brothers who are openly atheists, who are, Christians but don't attend church, or, people who don't even care. But we all cared about this experience and these values, and that's the bond that our brothers have. And all that hypocrisy that I had been feeling up until that point, all that cognitive dissonance that had been in some ways festering in my head and in my heart for, in some cases, years, it didn't all go away. But a significant portion of it, quite like a literal burden, did feel like it had been lifted as I realized, well, that's not what's important. This bond is important. The love that we actually feel for each other, and in trying to guide and protect and nurture each other, that's what's important. That is honestly more important to me than um, at that point in time anything else. It was the first time that I'd actually said, oh, right, this is what's important to me, and it's because I have chosen for it to be important to me, and not because somebody else said to, or because some group in an organized way had said to. Um, yeah, I it was that point forward that, I still had a lot of growth to work through, um, even in the past 10 years, and actually 12 years since graduating. I've had a lot more time to reflect on what standards and what beliefs I have, but that was the pivotal moment, really. That morning after initiation, when I said, "Oh, right, only I'm responsible for myself. I should not expect other people to have the same beliefs or standards that I have. It's not fair to do that. Why should or would I judge anybody based on their standards or their beliefs?" And even um, acknowledging at the time that, I still had some complicated beliefs and I wasn't upholding all of those beliefs. But that happens. We all, make mistakes, if you want to call it that, or otherwise we aren't always consistent, but that's okay. You know, one moment of hypocrisy is not the end of the world, or otherwise. Um, you know, uh, one moment of doubt, right, is not the end of the world either.
Nelson, thank you for that. I really like where you ended that that that, that statement, that comment. I was planning to make a joke about the fact that you did end up joining Lambda Chi, particularly for my Phi Mu Delta brothers who do listen to this podcast every so often. Um, I also got to a similar point, albeit in graduate school, with my fraternity. So thank you for that. I So I'm not even going to ask my fourth question because I think you've already answered it pretty well. But I want to know: is there anything else you would like to add? Um, take that however you would like, or anything you would like to promote.
Um, as a teacher, I try not to promote myself, but rather promote my students. But I, you know, I'm being facetious. So I guess as a wrap up for myself, you know, I started, or I have described, you know, the wrestling with myself that I have had, specifically, especially with LGBTQ plus community. And I am very thankful that, you know, I've had these transformative experiences to really figure out that, yeah, it's about love. It's not about what's right and what's wrong, because that's not it. Um, my stepbrother came out to our family a few years ago, and you know, there were those of us who were very supportive, and by that time I was I had gone through that part of my own change in beliefs, but there were parts of our family that were not supportive and were being exclusive, in is probably the nicest way that I can phrase that. I have students who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, but they do not feel comfortable outing themselves, and I completely understand why that is, because Nashville, Tennessee is, even the liberal bastion that it is of Tennessee, it is still a very strongly conservative state, and the population also is still holds, I should say, a lot of very fundamental conservative values that make my students question their own safety, sometimes even while they're in school. And I would hope that, you know, my story, and I share this with my students in a much limited capacity, obviously, but I would hope that my story is at least one that can, you know, show that yes, even even a bigoted, white privileged man can change, but also that, you know, there is support out there, you know, and we are responsible for providing support where we can as Christians.
This has been The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilsky.